Alrighty, picking up where we left off, that should have been ending with making a graph of your data points from data table number 1. I already have another video up about how to do that and talked about how the graphs were at the bottom. So we're going to pick up with part B, where you are going to design your own investigation. So previously here with the Pendulum Lab, we have looked at how the angle affects how long it takes for the period, or how long it takes for the back and forth swing to occur. So now, instead, what you need to do is you are going to look at how the acceleration is caused by gravity, but specifically we have the period and we have the length. So again, the period is, and you can kind of see, is when I pull it back, it swings and comes back. Swings and comes back. When it goes and comes back, that right there is one whole period. And then of course the length is the length of the rope, which is adjustable. And so what you need to do here is you are going to design your own experiment looking at how the length of the pendulum will affect how long the pendulum takes to swing back and forth for a period. So that's the key thing that you're looking at for part B. So of course, here's where you're going to record your hypothesis, not in the pre-lab section, which is why I deleted it earlier. So again, your hypothesis is an if-then statement. So you are looking at it where if the string is shorter or longer, then the period is going to take longer or not take as long, something along those lines. So the experiment is going to be very similar to what you did before. The only difference is, again, rather than changing the angle, this time you are going to be changing the length. But the mass is going to stay the same throughout the entire experiment here. Your mass is going to stay at 0.01 kilograms. So you're going to record your hypothesis, and you have to identify the different variables. So what is your independent variable? What is the variable that you are changing in this experiment? What is the dependent variable? What depends or what changes based off of what you changed? And then the controlled variable is what doesn't change. So again, looking back at this for part B, is you are seeing how different lengths will affect the period of the swing back and forth, but your mass does not change. And so now you're actually going to write out the experiment for number 9. So make it as detailed as possible. You can, again, use a very similar format to the lab above for part A, but this is where you're going to write out your step-by-step experiment. And so then you are also going to create a data table too in the observation section, which is right down here. So you're going to insert your data table. So probably going to be very similar. You can make the data table how you want, but again, instead of changing the degrees of the angle, you're changing the length of the pendulum. And you can keep recording for 20 swings in the period. That is perfectly okay. It is up to you how you want to set up your data table. When you set up your table, we'll see right here, you would go to Insert, Table, and then you would just give you however many sections you want. The one that I have for data table 1 is a 3x4, so I have 1, 2, 3 columns by 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. And so you're just creating the table, you're not putting anything in yet. Once you have written out your experiment, you have my express permission to go ahead and conduct this experiment. Unfortunately, this is not an in-class lab where I can just automatically look through your paper and be like, oh yeah, that's fine, go ahead and do it, or yeah, maybe you should take a look at this section again. We don't really have that ability, and it's a lot harder to get feedback on it, so I'm just going to tell you, you go ahead and do it. And then follow the steps that you wrote down. And if you realize, oh hey, I forgot to write down a step, go ahead and write it down. That is perfectly fine. As you are conducting your experiment, make sure that you are recording your data so that you do have 2 data tables by the end of it all. And so we finally come down to the analysis and the conclusions. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory. So for example, how did the angle from which you release the pendulum affect the maximum speed of the pendulum? All right, when it's talking about the maximum speed of the pendulum, it's talking about the amount of time it took for it to swing back and forth, the amount of time for a period to occur. What did your result in part A indicate about the relationship of the period of the pendulum and the position or the angle from which you released it? So how did the angle 10, 20, or 30 affect how long it took to swing back and forth? Did your results in part B support or contradict your hypothesis? So in part B, scrolling up, you are looking at changing the length of the pendulum and how it affects the period. And so you write out your hypothesis saying, oh, I think that this type of length will cause this type of period, so on and so forth. And so you have to write out why you think that's happening. And so in your results, did your results support or contradict your hypothesis? And you have to explain using the data from your table. And then last but not least, question number 4, evaluating and revising. So you're going to use this equation right here to determine the experimental error for the calculated values of G. So back up, oops, where'd it go? There it is. So right here we have our values of G. So you can go through and you can calculate gravity based off of the length and the period. Okay, and so when you go through and you calculate your values of G, those are your experimental values. The accepted value of gravity is mentioned back up in the background information section, and I highlighted it for you. And so that will help you calculate your experimental error and why might your calculated value of gravity differ from the accepted value. All right. And that is everything for this lab. Last but not least is the Go Further extra credit section. This is, again, completely optional, but I highly recommend doing it because it's basically the exact same thing that we've been doing. So if we look at part A, we're looking at how the angle 10, 20, or 30 degrees affects the period or the back and forth swing. So that's part A. Part B is we are adjusting the length to see how it affects the back and forth swing. And finally, you are looking at how the mass is going to affect the back and forth swing. And that's what the extra credit section is if everything else remains constant, how is the mass going to affect it? And it's basically the same thing as everything else, so you might as well go ahead and do it and get those extra credit points. As always, if you guys have any questions whatsoever, I am available over the Zoom meetings, or you can just shoot me an email. You can even add a private message to this particular assignment, so if you don't feel comfortable like posing a question to the entirety of the class, then you can just put a private message to your quote-unquote assignment, and oh, hi cat. You can put your private message, which I will answer directly, and nobody else has to see that. So y'all take care. Let me know if you have any questions. More importantly, let me know what you guys think about this, how better or worse you think it is compared to the first lab. Do we like trying to do these labs and experiment with things? Does the blue font of me, quote-unquote, explaining via text on the assignment help? Do these videos help? Feedback is always a great thing. I love hearing from you guys. I just want to know what works for you so that I can help you given these circumstances. So y'all take care, and I'll see you when I see you.